Ford, Spencer,
Here.
Spicer, Wiseman, Bright.
Here.
Thank you very much. Ms. Perry, I believe we are correct?
Correct. So we're going to start where we left off, which is on page 230. There are a couple more departments within the general fund here that we'll cover. This starts with the transfers and subsidies, and really what I'd like to point out here is this is where the airport subsidy and the transit subsidy are housed. So you can see the dollar amounts there that we have for airport subsidy, just over $131,000, and for the transit subsidy, $1.1 million.
So what page did you say? I thought you said
230.
230. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Nope, that's up front. Thank you.
Anyone with any questions on that? Okay.
I am here if I did miss roll call. Emily, thank you. Aaron Mealy.
Thank you.
Next page will be 232. This is the one thing to call out here. We talked at the last meeting about the vehicle leasing and the request to move out of 10185 into 10990 so that any surplus that we might have would roll from year to year. There is a $50,000 request here to get that started, which is something that has not previously been requested, but based on the market and what we've seen in FY23, we have requested $50,000, and by moving it to this department, it would allow those funds to reappropriate if they were unused from year to year. That's really all I had to call out as a remainder of the general fund. The next item would actually be on page 303, which would be capital improvement sales tax for the current 5-year iteration. To point out here in the revenue on sales tax, this is based on the 2.6% increase, just like the general fund increase was based. And the items that are listed here in the mayor's approved budget are the items that were outlined in that original 5-year plan. The thing that has been added in this particular sales tax is at the very bottom of page 303 and the top of page 304. These are the 2 line items that we have added per the request of the mayor, where we've taken 25% of the additional that was collected in the prior fiscal year and put that into an immediate needs project funding line. And at the top of page 304, there's 75% of that number. So we've put that into long-term project funding. These are the funds that Chief Schofield has made recommendations on how to utilize the immediate funding needs. But again, that is up to council. And I don't know if we need to have any further discussion on that. I'll leave that up to the committee.
So what are those funds for?
So those funds, just to start off, would be what was collected above and beyond the originally allocated funds within our 5-year model that we had for this particular sales tax. So it was what was collected last year. And we have split those funds 25% into use for immediate funding and 75% for long-term funding. I think what the chief has recommended and the mayor has seen is the use of the 25% of immediate funding needs. So the long-term funding would be completely up to council, whether you wanted to utilize it on certain projects now, whether you wanted it to roll forward because there's a big project you have in mind for the future, completely up to council discretion, as would be the immediate needs funding. But Chief Schofield has talked to the mayor about providing input on what staff believes those immediate needs are. And that would have come out of the meeting that department directors had to kind of talk about the overall priority for pink sheets.
Further questions?
If I could just weigh in on that, Ms. Perry did a great job. We had some discussion last year what we do with that difference between what we actually budget and what our actual collections are. And we had a long discussion, I guess 3 of us, maybe others, instead of spending that in advance, setting up some kind of system to capture it, we have cash, and then looking at how we can maybe supplement our budget. But then also looking at the long-term projects, as Ms. Perry indicated, example, the police station. For us to be able to put together that kind of money in a one-time, but if you as council said that's a priority project and you wanted to take 3, 4, 5 years of the 75%, then you start adding up real dollars and we can start attacking bigger projects. So that was kind of the thought process, to help cover some of the needs that we couldn't get in the budget, but then also have some funds to proactively look at longer term projects.
Sort of relate to the prioritized pink sheet list too, I would think.
Yeah, it does. It's taken kind of all that into account, but also, while we would say all those $25 million worth of pink sheet requests are all relevant and scored by priority by department, what we attempted to do was to bring everybody together and say, how would we look at that citywide, and then make a recommendation to council. Certainly, it's all up for your discretion, but we felt like that was giving a recommendation to council for further discussion.
Any other questions or comments? Councilman Spencer.
I do like this as far as having that line item where those, what we've called in the past, weaning funds. And I think some of us on the council really don't prefer that, like that term. But it was always kind of like pulling teeth to get that number from our previous city administrator. So, and that, with having that line item, that number can ebb and flow, even if we, project those numbers for the next year too. I mean,
It's important to note that what's in your document here is what has already been collected but unallocated. So we felt like it was more responsible for us to make recommendations on money that was in the bank, even though we anticipate there would potentially be the same situation next year. It gives you the ability to say, this is money that is available. And while we never know what the future holds, you could anticipate something similar in future years.
I appreciate the effort in that, because it's really nice to see that, and that'll be ongoing with our financial reports. So that'd be a highlighted item, wouldn't it? I mean, we kind of see that.
Certainly could, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll echo that. I appreciate the funds being more explicit in terms of the amounts and putting it into a more systematic planning.
Terrific. Any other questions or comments?
The next page is page 305. This is the public safety tax. This particular revenue item under the sales tax was also increased by the 2.6% that was used for both the capital improvement tax and the general fund. I just want to highlight that what you see here as a transfer to the general fund is based on the 2 CBA contracts that we had with both the police and the fire department. That would include those increases that they received. We account for those things in the general fund as part of their salaries, but the public safety tax is contributing to those items by moving the available funds to inside the general fund. What this is actually showing you is that there is anticipated to be use out of this particular fund balance of $340,000 for FY24. And I believe that that's what council would have anticipated, especially based on the fact that with the fire contract, there was an amount of money that they had not collected as early as the police department did, and council gave the explicit instruction that they were to receive that over the next 3 years of the contract. And so that's what you're seeing here. Money that was banked because it was collected but not paid out is now being paid out. Any questions on that? Okay, the next one is
For us online, we're just seeing somebody's desktop.
I didn't understand.
You can only see somebody's desktop. You can't see what.
For us online, we're just seeing somebody's desktop.
Councilman,
Presentation.
yeah, Councilman Mealy, there's no presentation on the screen.
Here.
Thank you.
If
he's able to access, Councilman, if you're able to access your budget document that's part of the packet, it's page 305 of that master budget document.
Yeah, I'm there. I just thought there was something supplemental on the online. So thanks for the clarification.
Of course.
The next one is page 306. This is the workers' comp fund. We have $400,000 worth of payments into the workers' comp fund from the other various city funds that have staff covered by them. And those funds will be utilized to pay for any workers' comp claims or anything else that we might have.
Questions?
Next is page 367. These are going to be the small funds that we start going through, the special revenue funds. There's not much to report here, so we'll go through those pretty quickly. 367 is the JC Veterans Trust Fund, the Plaza Trust Fund in front of the police department. We are recognizing a little bit of interest here, and we, as we typically do, have put some money into this fund for 24 to deal with any maintenance and repairs that might be necessary. That money utilizes the fund balance that does exist from this fund. Page 368 is the police training fund. The item to highlight here is that the police department's training line that Chief Wilde will be discussing here shortly was reduced in the general fund budget, and $30,000 worth of funds have been approved or are in this budget to use out of the police training fund. Those would come out of the fund balance that currently exists, and it would be recognizing some court cost fees that come into this fund as well. Next is page 369. This is the lodging tax fund. This recognizes we have increased just a little bit the amount of lodging tax that we anticipate getting. And what this reflects near the bottom, the transfers out, we pay a majority of this money to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and to the Convention and Visitors Bureau Conference Center Fund, with the exception of 2% that the city collects as an administrative fee. So that's what you see here are receipts in for lodging tax and payments out to the Convention and Visitors Bureau for the most part. 370 is the City Hall Trust Fund. The only thing we've recognized here is revenue. It does have a small fund balance in it. And if anything were to come up in this fund, we would come back to council for a supplemental appropriation out of the City Hall Trust Fund fund balance.
Councilman Spencer.
What is that?
So it's my understanding that the City Hall Trust Fund is intended for art type things here at City Hall. The most recent thing I can recall that we used it for was the seal that's out in the pavement in front of City Hall. That was one of the projects that was done out of this particular fund. Mr. Mullman, would you happen to know any more about that fund?
How does it get funds? Do people make donations to that?
So we have some history books that have been sold in the past. I think they also have maybe sold prints of some type down in the PPS area. So it has collections periodically, and because it does have a small fund balance, it also gets some interest collections on it. And anything here that we thought it might be used for would come back to council for supplemental appropriation as well, since we don't have anything here in the budget for.
I thought I think there were some donations that were related to the artwork out on the entryway. So if anyone's feeling particularly generous.
Mr. Lester, cut a check to that.
Page 371 is the USS Jefferson City Submarine Trust. This does have a small fund balance, and so it is accumulating a little bit of interest. Historically, we would not put any funds in here for expenditure until such time as we knew that they would be visiting us. at which time those funds would be used out of the fund balance from this fund as well.
We do anticipate utilizing that in their next upcoming visit.
And then we've got page 372, which is the Woodland Cemetery Trust. It earns interest periodically. It will also have some donations into it. In this particular case, we have put in, per the request of David Grellner, some funds for cemetery restoration, maintenance, and repairs type things. We've done that historically over the last several years, and it will be used out of the fund balance for this particular fund.
Related to the cemeteries, we did use ARPA funds last year to do some pretty
Correct.
significant, and that was included in that.
The ARPA funds would have been out of the general fund because that's kind of where we took those revenues into. So this is really just the maintaining of the Woodland Cemetery. Sometimes we have trees that need to be removed and things like that need to be
I can't
done.
remember which cemetery it was, that there was some major fence repair that needed to be taken care of too, and so we just never received an update on those repairs. So, but it sounds like that was taken care of. So, thank you.
And the last one that I have starts on page 373. It's the TIF redevelopment. These funds are actually brought into this fund from general parks and the capital improvement tax. A certain portion of the collections out of those three funds get transferred in here for us to take care of the payments out to developers that fall under the TIF program. That is all I have for today. That finishes all of the special revenue, all of the sales tax, and all of the general fund. And unless there are any questions, I think we had the police department next on the list.
Are there any final questions for Ms. Perry? None. Chief Weldy.
Good afternoon and thank you. Prepared a small budget presentation for you today. Just for background, I know we've got a few new councilmen on the council, but if you have any questions about these, I'm going to try to roll through them pretty quickly. But I wanted to establish an organizational chart so you see how we're broken down. I won't go into it in detail, but it's there. If you have questions, please contact me. But to get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, the police department's overall budget this year stands at just over $13 million, 89%, around 90% of which is personnel costs. Around 10% of that is other expenditures. The police department's overall budget is broken into 5 separate budgets, being the general police budget that takes up 73%. The communications or the 911 budget is another 14%. Animal control is about 6%. And we also manage a Mustang budget internally to keep all of those expenditures noted separately from the regular budget. Same with the school resource officer budget. Those get a lot of reimbursements from other departments or other entities, so we keep those budgets separate. Overall, what I really want to highlight, there's not a lot of change in our budget per se. I want to highlight some of the changes in what I would call our discretionary spending. We have some changes in personnel and facilities and such, but some of the requests that went in this year, I'll talk about the changes to those. So in the main police budget, we saw a $15,000 increase in our ammunition and firearm supplies. The overall cost of ammunition over the last year or so has gone up about 30%. So to accommodate for that, we've got an extra $15,000. Office supplies has not changed. We've added $2,300 for operational supplies. The recruitment line item, that has been taken down to zero. But we did get that supplemental last council meeting with the $50,000 for our marketing campaign. We've added $22,800 to the building and grounds maintenance, $17,000 to software license management, and $23,000 to maintenance agreements. As Ms. Perry pointed out earlier, we've seen a decrease of $25,600 in our training and education line item, but that will be offset by the police training fund. If there are any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer. Moving on to the SRO budget, very similar. There weren't many asks this year, but there was a maintenance agreement for some software. We've added $56.40 to that budget for the discretionary spending. Moving Moving on to Mustang, there were no asks of that, requests for change to the budget. Animal control, we did add $4,896 to our software license maintenance agreements, went up by $1,046. And then we've added $480 to our crematory maintenance and repair due to the contract we have for the repair and maintenance on that piece of equipment. So overall impact on that was $6,422 for the animal control budget. And then our communications budget, operational supplies was decreased by $575. Software license and maintenance agreements gone up by $2,215. No change in the equipment maintenance line item, and maintenance agreements has gone up $4,556.40 for a total of $6,196.40 increase to the discretionary spending of the 911 budget. So if there are any questions about the line items now, I'd be happy to entertain those, and I can go into pink sheet discussion.
Any questions for Chief Whitley?
Going into our general police budget, for those that have been on the council for a while, you generally see this request every year is a certain number of police vehicles. It's an ongoing issue with us to keep the best fleet available. This year, we've identified at least 5 vehicles that are in the 70 to 90,000 mile range. Pretty much when a police vehicle gets into the 100,000 miles range, it's become more of a maintenance headache and it just becomes unsafe. So those 5 vehicles that we have identified that will be hitting that 100,000 mile mark next year, we're asking to have those replaced. Number 6 on the list, we've got this constant goal to become completely interoperable with our public safety partners as far as radio communications. We undertook a program or a project 2 years ago to replace all of our portable radios. Those are the radios that we carry on our waists so that we can speak with other agencies through those, but to replace all of the in-car radios, that comes at a cost of about $212,000. We have applied for, I think it's 2 or 3 different grants this year that we're still waiting to see if we can receive some of those radios off of state grants. So that number may go down, but the end goal is to get mobile and portable radios that allow us to talk to other public safety partners. One thing we found out soon after the tornado, we did have some roof damage and we did have that fixed, but that roof I don't think has been replaced since the building was built in 1979. So when the fixes were being applied to it after the tornado, it was determined that roof is ready to be replaced, and that would come in at the sum of around $312,000. Obviously wanted to keep that building renovation expense on there. That $7,700,000 was determined in 2019, so I can assure you that that number has gone up. I don't have an update on that yet, and I don't expect that to come out of this year's budget, but it's worth noting that still exists.
Chief, I got a question.
Sure.
So last year, council approved some funds for some renovations in the current building. I believe maybe a locker room renovation, perhaps maybe some bathroom renovation. I can't remember what the other elevator, perhaps.
Elevator replacement and locker room renovations. So
are those proceeding?
The elevator replacement is complete. We have a new elevator that is operational, and we're starting on the process for the locker room renovation right now.
Thank you.
There's always been a desire to put an outdoor warning siren in North Jefferson City. That would cost around $52,000, $53,000. Active shooter vest replacement. The vests are pretty predictable. They generally have 5 to 8 year warranty periods on them where they say they're safe to use or not to use, and these were due for replacement in 2022-23 timeframe. Looking at some other options for that as well that might be a little bit less expensive, but as submitted to replace all of the active shooter vests is around $70,000. And then looking ahead at kind of what the community demands and what the courts demand now is to try to find some software reconstruction equipment for our traffic crashes as well as crime scenes, because the days of walking into a courtroom with a report and not presentation are sort of over. We've really got to be able to demonstrate through technology what happens at these scenes. And that GPS crash reconstruction equipment allows us to reconstruct an accident through GPS coordinates and really do a 3D display if ever called into court. So we're looking to increase our technology capabilities through those two items as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there possibilities for grants for that type of upgrade of equipment?
There are, and we're always looking for those. The grants that you're seeing right now are pretty specific. It wouldn't necessarily cover those type of items that the crash reconstruction equipment. There are some highway safety grants that we could look into, but I haven't seen any that are specifically allowable for that.
Well, generally on the revenue side, I'm just curious, what percentage of your budget is funded through the safety tax? Do you know?
Public safety tax? I don't know what percentage it is right now. I haven't seen the numbers, but essentially the public safety tax pays for the increase in salaries for the police officers, and I think we're holding on to a reserve balance there to address the ongoing expense for the body worn cameras.
It's a relatively small supplement, correct? Perhaps 10% or I don't know the exact figure. It's a relatively small add-on to the regular general fund funding, correct? Outside of public safety?
For equipment?
Oh, just for equipment?
No, so I'm asking that question. Is that, I missed what we're talking about.
The question was the percentage of the total police department budget that is funded through safety tax.
I would anticipate that would be a fairly small percentage,
Yeah, I know.
but I don't have that number. I can see if I can get that.
I was thinking it was 10 to 15%.
What are the questions at this point? Seeing that, Chief.
Pink sheet summary for animal control. You've seen these part-time administrative technician positions on there for several years in a row now. We run into a struggle at times at the animal shelter, and just to set the stage, with the exception of Parks and Rec, I would say that the animal shelter probably garners the most visits of any other department or section within city government. We have roughly 25,000 visitors a year to the animal shelter. And generally when they come in, the only people or person that can greet them is either the veterinarian or a veterinarian tech or an animal control officer that is not out on a call. So it's very happenstance. And we do get occasional complaints about the customer service at the animal shelter because people, whenever they come in and want to adopt animals, want to see animals, they want to have somebody sitting at the front desk, welcome them, show them through the facility and direct them towards the level of their life, their new pet. We lack that capability, and we felt the best way to go about that would be to add 2 part-time admin techs that would work those shift hours, alternating, so that it's a receptionist, it's a greeter, and somebody that can help them through the shelter. Final item is the animal shelter crematorium. That comes in at a little over $99,000. That is not because the current crematorium we have is ready to be replaced. This is due to the demand and the amount of cremations that are being conducted down there. We could justify having 2 of those right now. Finally, on to communications, and we touched on this a little bit at the Public Safety Committee meeting this morning, but again, for several years we've been asking for a communications operator 1. We currently have 3 squads of operators. One has 7, 7, and 6. No, 6, 6, and 5. Anyway, one of the squads is unbalanced. We're short by 1. So we've always been wanting to level out those teams so that they're equal and there's equal coverage. But we currently only have 3 supervisors. So at any given point, on alternating days, there's either a supervisor on duty in the center or they're not on duty and there's no supervision going on. So we're promoting to add 3 communications supervisors and also a communications manager that would deal with a lot of the administrative aspects of that job and the day-to-day operations of the communications center. The 911 center renovation, again, this would probably be more of a capital improvement sales tax, but in the last 20 years, we haven't replaced any of the consoles. A lot of them are getting very old and very broken down. I'm I found some money this year. We're gonna try to put new carpet in. That'll be the first time we had new carpet in a long, long time, but that 911 center could use some dressing up, and consoles being around $25,000 a piece, it adds up in a hurry with 6 consoles. And then our backup 911 center at Station 3, that uninterrupted power supply. All of the computers out there right now are on their own smaller uninterrupted power supply. We want to put that into a larger one power supply that runs the entire backup 911 center, so that if there's a surge or a breakdown in the power to the facility, that battery would kick in and keep everything online, so that we don't have to do a reboot during operations. With that, that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Very much. Any questions for Chief Wilkie, Police Department?
I got a question on mine, Chair Hensley.
Councilman Neal.
Yeah, thank you. Chief, I was just wondering, I know that, just turning on my camera. I know that the shelter often reaches out on social media to get food supplies for both cats and dogs. And I think they get a lot of community support, so I really appreciate that. But is that like built into, has that been something that occurs for a long time, whereas the community supplements the shelter's need for food? Or is there a need in a budget to provide that food without the shelter having to do this community outreach, weekly or a couple of times per month?
I don't think that there's a requirement to offset our budget with donations. We cover most of the care of animals with our budget. The only things that are donated to us generally, if it's treats or small bags of dog food, is to enhance what we already have. But I think we can cover that without having to go out to the public and ask for donations. There is a animal shelter fund where people do make donations. We receive a lot of donations after the fact, maybe someone passing that wants to donate a portion of their inheritance to the fund down there. So we do have an animal shelter fund on the side that we can use for discretionary spending, but that's generally for things that are for the care and welfare of the animals, and make the shelter a more friendly place to visit.
All right. Thank you.
Very much. Any other questions for Chief Wilkie?
Councilman Hensley, can you hear me?
Councilman Allers, is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Internet, we're gonna on the phone. The crematorium Chief Willie was talking about, are there? I guess I didn't catch part of it. Is there fees with that? People for the cremation of their pets or anything?
He's asking if there are fees for cremation services.
Yes, there are fees, and
Yes.
We'll speak very briefly on that there. For general cremations done within the city limits, the participating veterinarians here, basically if you want a private cremation where you receive the remains back, there's a fee associated with that the veterinarian charges in addition to just covering the cost of the cremation at the shelter. For the general cremations where the animal's deceased and we're disposing of that animal, there is a nominal fee charged per animal to the person or that.
Thank you. Councilman Allers, could you hear that?
Yeah, and then the last question I had is, I believe there was if I've looked at some of the overtime, it seems like it's usually quite a, well, I don't know, about $10,000 a year on overtime. Are there a lot of calls on the evening side or after hours? I guess that maybe the council or citizens aren't aware of that. That's why it's such a large amount of overtime.
Is that overtime just generally across the department? You're not just talking about the animal shelter anymore, right?
I believe I saw with the media request for some numbers that in the last 2 years is roughly around so far $10,000 a year in overtime expenses and all that. It's kind of maybe a question about, are these evening responses or things that the police?
Any response?
As it pertains to animal control, yes, we do have call out situations where people have to be called out in the middle of the night to go handle an animal call. But I would say pretty much across the board that even in police, 911, and animal control combined, a lot of our overtime expenses come from shortages. We still have the requirement to fulfill certain positions, and with the shortages we've experienced, even in animal control, we've had to offset that through the use of overtime.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Deacon.
It's no question, but those are the unsung heroes of the city, the animal control. I get more calls from my constituents about dog calls. I mean, especially when the people think the dog isn't being treated well. Those guys working day and night. I mean, even I'm telling on myself a couple of times, my horses got out in the middle of the night and they had to show up. I mean, they were just as sleepy as I was, but and those guys work hard. I mean, my hat's off to them. They're dealing with not only the animals, they're dealing with a lot of emotional people, and sometimes more so than what they feel about their own children. So good luck to those guys.
I appreciate that feedback, and it is kind of telling because I run annual statistics every year. What's our biggest calls for service? And every year it's at least within the top 10, but it's generally in the top 5 calls for service in our city as animal calls. So they do stay very, very busy.
Well, you might have to add to the job description of horse wrangler.
We've done that. We've wrestled cattle, hogs. Maybe we should just put a special watch on Councilman.
We have good fences now, and
Excellent. Seems like a good place to stop the police department. Anything else for Chief Wilde?
If you cremate a horse, is it the same cost as a dog?
We're gonna have to prorate that.
Sounds like a special cremation.
Just checking.
Keep the remains then.
Make glue.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Chief. Next is the fire budget presentation.
Thank you, Councilman. I don't have a presentation. I think we'll just walk through the mayor's budget really quickly. Starting on page 136, starts with our performance measures. Just to call to your attention, we've changed our measuring, the way we measure those. We've gone to more percentage-based trying to meet the objective versus an average, which is a difference than what we've had in the past, which aligns more with our industry. Typically, we want to know a 90th percentile kind of performance versus an average. That's more predictive of how we're doing things. And we've also reduced those. So in the past, you've seen 9 or 10 of those. We're down to 5, and there may be an addition or 2 as we go through that. But if there's any questions on those benchmarks, we haven't answered them now. Otherwise, I'll move on.
Any questions?
Starting with our line items on 138, I'll let Ms. Perry speak about our personal services and the numbers there in the lines.
So we did discover that there is an issue in the detailed listing that you have of the mayor's budget for 10-400 salaries. Because of the CBA contract with the fire department, we've had to assign some new general ledger accounts, and one of those accounts fell off of this listing. The dollar amount itself is actually included in the salaries account, but it's $82,395.68 that should come out of that salaries account and instead go into an account that's titled Training and Essential Functions. In order for us to track things properly, we have set that up. So that is one of the items that when we get to the parking lot, I do have some things I've preloaded that we'll go over. No change in the dollar amount in total for the fire department, but that will be split out. And it's one of the things I put on the parking lot for council to address.
Thank you. I just want to call that to your attention in case you saw it later on. Going down, no real significant changes to materials and supplies. They almost equal out as we've seen some ups and downs there. Under training and education, we did ask for an increase to the training and education fund, which is separate from what Ms. Perry talked about, actually how we pay for tuitions. And and things of that nature, and also where we paid for testing supplies for new hires. Asking for a little bit more there to cover a more current way of testing employees and new employees and allowing them to maybe remote, trying to adapt to the times as we've all tried to talk about. That really sums up most of the changes on our line items. If there's no questions there, we'll just go ahead and move into pink sheets. The first several pink sheets are personnel. I think they've been on the budget for pink sheet items several times, and I'm going to apologize. I'm getting used to these readers, so if I lose them in the middle of this, you'll have to pause with me. The first four, 3 personnel for the ladder truck, some part-time office support, which we've had in the past, deputy fire chief's position, and a fire marshal, obviously 4 personnel. Number 5 is mobile portable radios. As Chief Willie said, we're always working towards more interoperability with our public safety partners. And that covers the request. That's something that we can split up and work in stages. So at council's pleasure, if they found funding, there's probably a way to work through that number. Fire Station 5, I'm going to do 6 and 8 together. Fire Station 5, the storm shelter, that is the one remaining station that probably doesn't have an identified area of refuge due to its construction type. Working with architects now on that project, and number 8, which is also a safety concern at Hyde Park, to get a hard cost. We found out during COVID that we just didn't have enough room in our classroom to get any type of separation, so it really hampered our operations there. Did a lot of digital stuff. Fire Station 6, which you're all, I think, familiar with, that property that's allocated on Mission Drive between the St. Mary's and the high school. Replacement fire response vehicles, just to keeping the fleet up to date. And then I'm going to kind of breeze through the other ones that have been there before, mostly because I want to save some time for the last one, which we talked about public safety this morning. And I'm going to ask Chief Schofield to step in. That's been a 3-year ongoing project that he has the details on. I think it's better for him to speak to than me.
Absolutely. So you'll remember that we have been talking about a replacement crash truck at the airport for some time. And the reason that this pink sheet says 1 million, and the reason that it is ranked number 15 is when we printed this budget, we thought we had secured the state funding for that project. And so that was May, June timeframe. And since that time, we received a letter from the governor that was part of his veto, where he cut that in half to 500,000. And so that's the reason this pink sheet was the lowest in priority, is we thought we had it handled. But with that new information, we kind of weighed our options, and we made a presentation this morning at Public Safety Committee, and part of that was with a representative, State Representative Griffith, who's been a champion of this project and really was the one who helped us with this, get it through the legislature. And we've come to the conclusion that really we have 3 choices. We can try to hold the money where it's at and maybe seek additional funds in future years. The idea of doing that and the likelihood of receiving additional funds, the remainder of the funds we need to do the 100% project is kind of rolling the dice. We feel like that's probably not real likely, not real optimistic about the outcome of that. However, we could also look at, as an alternate option, we could look at a used truck, and we have been. We've been looking at that for about the last 4 or 5 months in earnest, and then really hard the last 2 months. And we realized that the used truck market in this particular segment, which is very specialized, is also not very good in the secondary market in terms of reliability, parts availability, and just overall functionality. So we are not recommending buying another used truck. And when I say used, our current truck is 33 years old, and so it's not compatible with modern fuels. We can't find parts. It is just not reliable. So we feel like there's a need to do something. And so what we've been doing is working with some of the various vendors that we have relationships with to try to get an idea of what could be done if we had 550,000. And so we think that we can do something that's about 80% of the functionality that we need. And that's still being very, very cost conscious and sharpening the pencil very, very tight. But we think that that's a product that would get us into something that is new and has the primary functions covered. And it really would just be a dedicated foam truck, essentially not a full ARF truck. But we feel like under the circumstances, that's probably our best bet. And so that's our recommendation to council, is to utilize the existing funds from the state. The governor in his letter said that he really wanted us to have a partial match. So that's what the $50,000 comes in from the request for council, is that we would have a $50,000 10% match of that 500, and we would be in line with the spirit of his funding. So that's the big ask for the fire department in this budget cycle, and that is one of the items that's part of that 75-25 split that we've said is an opportunity for us to address this long-standing issue with the crash truck, or the aircraft rescue firefighting truck, ARF truck, over at the airport. So happy to answer any questions if council has any on that particular request.
Councilman Spencer.
Do you have any conceptual ideas, looks of what the truck would look like?
Yeah, so very austere, a two-person cab, but we want to be able to let it be operated by one person, because that's typically how we would operate. We would take a regular fire truck, would go to the airport, respond to the location, drop off one firefighter to then drive the ARF truck. They would go together to address the incident. And then we're trying to build it in such a way that there's as many controls are automated in the cab for that vehicle, so that it's can be efficiently deployed with just one person and flow a blanket of foam. So what it would look a lot like is a tanker, but a 3,000-gallon tanker that's made specifically to flow foam out of a turret in the front. So it's not a full-fledged ARF truck. It's not what you see when you go to St. Louis or Kansas City or any of the other major airports, but it does serve a really important function. And it would also be useful for other roadway incidents that might involve hydrocarbon fuels, gasoline tanker trucks. We have had experience with that in this town before. So it is a very versatile piece of apparatus, and it is a need. Right now the timeline would be about 2 years. We're hoping maybe 18 months, but realistically 2 years. So at that point, we're at 35 years in. So we realize that we are on borrowed time with the current truck.
Bump and roll, all that. So that's the big need there. So
it is.
Any other questions for Chief Schofield on this particular item? Thank you.
That's all I have for council, unless I have any questions about anything we talked about previously.
Any other questions on the fire department proposed budget? Thank you very much. Anything else?
So this would typically be the point where we would start with council discussions. If that is the intention of the chairman, then I would like to talk about the parking lot. The things I've already preloaded, and because we have new council members, we probably need to speak about the ground rules for the parking lot.
Please proceed.
So for those new council members, we refer to the parking lot for any changes that have been proposed by council and that they've come back with funding opportunities for, and that have been voted on by the group to add to the parking lot. The items that are preloaded on the parking lot are items that I have discovered we have issues with, that are issues I created, so I'm going to put them up here to start with. On the general fund, we have discovered that in the 10-300 budget, which is the normal police department budget, I have 2 additional police officers that should be in the 10-310 school resource officer department. So at the bottom on those first 4 lines, I'm taking it out of 10-300 and putting it into 10-310. What that essentially does is it creates an additional $70,000 worth of revenue on the top, because the public school does provide a match of 50% for the school resource officer budget. So this just corrects that issue and puts the additional revenue into the general fund. The bottom two are the two that I talked about for the fire department. This is where we're taking it out of personnel services and we're actually putting it into that training and essential functions general ledger account. Has no net effect. The next tab is for for parks. These are the items that we talked about when the Parks Department made their presentation. These are all of the capital project items that were added after the mayor provided his budget to council. So these are the individual projects that were identified by Parks, and it is $2 million that's being used out of their fund balance. So those would be the items that would need modifications. General fund because of errors on my part, and the Parks Fund as the items that the commission approved that are not in the packet that council currently has before them.
You have anything else on that? Yeah, so I think just the simplest way I can explain the ground rules for the parking lot is any council member, any member of the committee can ask for to have an item that they would like to see funded. They can either propose it and come with a funding source and move for the adoption of those changes at that time, or they can ask for it to be placed on the parking lot and have discussion on the topic. But if someone were to come with such an item in this meeting, they would have until the end of our next meeting to come with a funding source, propose the swap, and then have it voted on by the end of next meeting. Otherwise, it falls off the parking lot, at least temporarily, because you can always come back if you find another source of funding, and then start the process over again. I think that's the least amount of time I've spent on that in the last 4 years. So we'll see if we have to revisit the topic.
How do we treat parks? They have their funding source. Actually, they have $8 million in the fund balance. So there's no problem funding that. Do we just go ahead and pass that through, or?
I'll refer to someone on staff to talk about how the council treats the parks budget and their funds. Anyone want to take that one over?
So typically the commission is required to approve the budget before it comes to council. So that has happened. That was done prior to Mr. Leichel coming in. These items that are on the parking lot here are items that the commission approved, but were not included in the original document that I provided to you because I did not have them. So at this point, I will leave it at that. Council still approves the parks budget. You could treat this like any other item, I think, within the parks budget, but it has passed through the commission at this point for their approval. I don't know that that helps, but that's what I can say about it.
And Parks has a certain level of, or the commission has a certain level of control over the parks budget that is unique to other city departments.
Correct. I think it is stated that the commission has the control over the expenditures of the parks budget, however that is interpreted.
Not much words.
Is it your opinion that the parks fund stands appropriated, or does it require an action by us?
It requires an action by you. Chapter 640, which is our sales tax statute, requires that expenditures of that sales tax is approved by the governing body of the city. And so there is an affirmative action that has to be taken by the council to at least approve the expenditure of the sales tax portion of the parks budget.
Can we add to the parks budget?
Parks budget. Add to in what realm?
They submit a budget of $100. We want to add $10 more to it.
It depends on what the funding source of the addition is.
Parks fund, the sales tax.
Sales tax. problem is that the statute and the charter don't particularly play well together. That's a question that I think I would probably have to do a little bit more research in and get back the city council. So what the charter says is that the Parks Commission has exclusive control of money that has been collected for the parks, put into the Parks Fund. And then you blanket that with the sales tax statute that says that the city council has to approve those expenditures. I have a theory. I don't think I feel particularly comfortable espousing that to the city council in an open session. I'd rather do that in writing to the council.
Councilman Spencer.
The timing of passing the budget, whether it's the parks budget, could that be passed separately from our budget that has to be passed by November 1? I know we've always did them concurrently.
Yeah. I think from a legal perspective, from a pure legal perspective, I don't think there would be any problem with that. I'm not sure what type of logistics and administrative problems that may cause.
Not saying we're going to have this issue, Chairman, but in case we go beyond the October 31st timeframe and we have to go into November.
So what state law says is last year's budget.
So I just wanted to make sure I was correcting that. That's all.
Thank you very much. Anything else from staff before we just continue? Okay. Any other? This is sort of an open, free range conversation here, and it's just sort of led by the entire committee. So, and I will also say that I will continue with past practice, and if the conversation reaches a natural conclusion and we are still quite a ways from our scheduled end time, I will adjourn the meeting. So you're welcome. Any committee discussion, comment, questions, proposed items? Anybody online? Any committee member online? Any comments, questions?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, done. Anyone here in the audience intending to make a public comment today? Our next meeting will be a week from today, I believe, September 7th at 5:30 p.m. until 7 p.m. And we'll just pick up where we were leaving off today with committee discussion of the budget. Chief?
I did have one thing that I might pass out to the committee, and we'll put up on the board just for your, really for a point of discussion, maybe to plant a seed for future discussion. One of the things we worked on as staff for a while this year was to try to build a chart, an organizational chart that reflected the way things work, and to update that. And even what's in your budget document that was published back in June is, this has changed a little bit, it's evolved a little bit. And we understand that it's a moving target and that with the organizational review, it may change. We understand that as staffing things change, it may change, but we thought it was helpful, not only for a new city administrator, but also for this group to be aware of kind of the way we see it, the way we see it operating. And then ultimately, if changes are to be contemplated, we're open to that feedback. And so what you have before you and what's on the screen is a conceptual organizational structure. Now, we did our best to reflect not only what is currently happening, but also what has kind of been proposed in this budget. So that's the major nuances. I'll draw your attention to just underneath the city administrator, we have the Office of Emergency Management, which is proposed in this budget, as well as the mayor's initiative for a public relations coordinator, also proposed in the mayor's approved budget. So the other tricky part of trying to put this into print is that, we have an organizational structure that is unique in that there are primary and secondary lines of authority, I'll call them, is the best way I can think of to describe those. So the dashed lines are kind of where there's a secondary nature of authority. And so, for example, the city clerk works directly for the mayor and city council primarily. But in our system, that position also serves as a member of kind of the leadership team of city staff. Similarly, the city attorney is the same way. And then ultimately, the Parks Department is also kind of the same way. It kind of lends itself to this conversation. While the Parks Commission members are appointed by the mayor, approved by council, they also fit within the organizational structure. So we just wanted to present this to council more just for a point of conversation. If ultimately, there's major concern or desire to change something, please let us know, give us that feedback. But we felt like it was an important time to do that because the one that was previously included in budgets was woefully out of date and just very different from what we actually do, how it actually operates.
Councilman Spencer.
Just maybe something that would be added to.
Sure.
I've requested in the past, but it would be nice to see how our boards and commissions funnel from these branches.
Yeah, and we kind of contemplated that, and what we thought to do that, it would almost not be linear, but it would kind of almost spider out a little bit more. And so that's kind of like the phase 2 that we've contemplated is how do we start with this and then talk about the interplay with all the different boards and commissions.
Because that, an important distinction is the park is volunteer based, not elected officials.
That's right.
And they are appointed, so.
Yep. And the color code that we have here currently is not the final color code, and nor does it actually mean anything at this point. That would require a little more work to get a color code that actually means the responsibility of the level.
And I realize this has not been disseminated, especially to those that are online. So once we leave this meeting, I will put it out and send an email that you can sync your iPad so that you will have this electronically as well.
So under police, the SWAT and crisis negotiations are hashed like that because.
Yeah, I'll let the police chief, at his request, to weigh in on that, the dash lines.
Yes. Everything else is a full-time assignment, but our SWAT and crisis negotiations are part-time assignments that are filled as needed. That occurs.
But filled by full-time members of the department.
Yes. And so there are probably other applications of that same concept within this organizational chart. That was just something that the chief and I talked about, and we thought is important to kind of highlight that in certain situations, those things are filled by personnel kind of on an as-needed basis. They come together to perform a mission or a task, but they're not a standing group.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. So yeah, we've now entered the stage of this conversation where we are getting close to the finish line. So just encourage all my committee colleagues to come with any proposed priority changes that they see that they'd like to try to find funding for, and then also try to come with some sort of funding source idea for discussion. So thanks everyone for being here today. Ms. Perry?
One more statement. So as you go back and start reviewing items, if there are any things that you intend to bring to the next meetings that will require research on staff's part, if you could coordinate those through me so that I can make sure that we get all of the information rounded up and so that we're prepared to answer the questions at the next meeting. It will just prevent us from continuing to meet for short periods of time. Maybe we can get those questions answered and move on with it. I would appreciate that.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing else, I will call us adjourned and see everyone next Thursday at 5:30. Thank you.
Thank you.